Okay, this is film class, week 11, part 7. Yeah. Um, okay. There's other ways in which the camera breaks down, and again, you see this in David Lynch. You see it a little bit in Blue Velvet, and you see it a lot in Mulholland Drive, where it's like her rage is so much that the camera at some point seems like it's broken. Like the camera can't focus on what's happening. And then you get these crazy images of the eyeball and Christ and that chaotic shit from the very first couple of minutes of the movie. But this idea that it's an interesting idea that usually we treat film like it's just a window into another world and we just want to find out about that world. But here, it's like the world, the emotions of the character are so much that it literally breaks the movie. The film itself catches fire or falls apart. The camera doesn't work properly anymore or focus. It's a very different thing to do with a movie. That kind of thing never happens in a Marvel movie. Okay, cool. All right, so I think we're ready to move on to sort of the next part of the movie. There's an image there, by the way, of a child in war. This is an image from the Holocaust. This is like Nazis executing Jews and children in particular. It doesn't. It's interesting because it reminds us of that monk on fire again. It's this kind of horrific loss of life, but it's also children. It's about dead children. Which may not seem, I mean, the Holocaust seems like a strange thing to bring up in a movie like this, but the link is dead children. And we're thinking about, it's really about Alma and Vogler and and Vogler's child and Alma's abortion. And the dead kids in war, and that kid who looked dead at the beginning of the movie, who reaches out and touches for his mother's face. It's the link. It's a thematic link. Again, I told you, movies are a form of thinking. One of the things they're thinking about is dead kids, and guilt over an abortion, worries about dead kids, and we're going to get to Vogler's issue with her child in a second. Right, she puts the radio on, all right, sorry, I'm zipping ahead here. But at one point they put the radio on. I'm moving on now. At one point they put the radio on, and it's about an inability to talk, an inability to listen, an inability to connect, an inability to communicate. And think about, for example, that monk that set himself on fire, right? People can say, hey, your group is persecuting me, your group is treating my group badly, your group is being shitty, and they don't feel listened to. I mean, it's like black people in this country, with Black Lives Matter, where it's like, you can try to say stuff about how, hey, I don't think cops should be murdering innocent black men for shooting them, or women, or black people shooting them for no reason, shooting and killing unarmed black people. I don't do that. And then people don't listen. And then when they don't listen, that's why people protest. It's because they're being completely ignored. These cops are being let go, and they don't face any consequences, or hardly any consequences. And because communicating the normal way didn't work, and so you have to move on to a different form of communication, which is protest, which could be violence, just property destruction, for example. But so it's a form of communication. It's what happens when people don't listen. When people don't listen, when people say, "Hey, can you please stop killing? Can you please stop being brutal and killing and just hurting black people," and the police refuse to listen, then we move on to other forms of communication like protest and violence and just property destruction and that kind of thing. The same thing with the monk, right? He's like, my people are being hurt. How does he communicate? Apparently he's been ignored. And think about how much you have to be ignored before you move on to communicating through property destruction. And think about how much that monk must have been ignored to move on to communicating by setting his own body on fire and dying in a horrible, horrible way. There's something like that here, where Alma desperately needed someone to listen to her. And then it turned out that person wasn't really a sympathetic listener. She wasn't being listened to like a human being. She was being used. And that is the worst feeling in the world, to use somebody to accomplish something else. Because you should treat people as an end in and of themselves, right? You treat people like people, but to use someone is to treat a person like a thing. And that's what Vogler has done to Alma, and why she is so enraged, and why her rage, when she thought she was communicating with words, and now she's so angry that the film itself begins to rip apart, because the sort of regular forms of communication are now broken, because she can't communicate with her anymore. Okay, and they talk about failures to communicate. All right, good. Cool. The movie begins to really break down and go into strange directions at this point. Sorry, I keep swooping it under the thing. The movie begins to break down and go in really strange directions at this point. And she confronts her and wants her to speak, and she's going to like burn her with the water. But the movie starts to lose almost starts to lose the borders. Remember I mentioned that fence with the snow on either side? It's like the two women start blending more now into one woman. It becomes confusing who is who and what is what. And if they have roles, their roles were a little confusing before. Wasn't Alma supposed to be the doctor and Vogler the patient, but it felt like Vogler was the doctor and Alma's the patient? Well, now it feels like Alma is Vogler and Vogler is Alma as they start crossing over. This man arrives, the first and only man in the movie. And it's like Vogler's husband, but he seems to feel like Alma is his wife. There's not a simple answer to this. It's just that they've blended and their identities have blended together in such a way that they have trouble telling each other or themselves, or we have trouble telling themselves apart. So that the husband starts talking to Alma as if Alma is Vogler, and Alma just accepts the role because they become, the level of the intimacy between the two women has become so much that they've blended together in this very complicated way. The words the husband speaks come from the letter that Alma read for Vogler. Remember, and again, because Vogler doesn't speak, Alma read the letter to Vogler. Remember that scene where she grabs the letter and tears it away from her at the last second when it's going to get too intimate, when it's going to get about sex? Alma had no problem telling Vogler about her sex life, but Vogler didn't want Alma reading about her sex life in a letter from her husband. But that the words the husband are speaking are from the letter. Well, that makes it sound like he's not quite real, like it's a construction in Alma's head that she built out of the letter she read, but it's hard to know what's going on. And they talk about wanting that child. There's a discussion about children and wanting the children, and again, Alma's guilt over her own abortion. And then there's like a funny, we kind of skip for a second. The movie edits something out, but it feels a little bit like, Alma maybe had sex with this guy, and again, the guy said Alma was Vogler, and so I guess that would have been him having sex with his wife, but I don't even know who these people are anymore. But it felt, for a hot second in the movie, it seems like Alma had sex with Vogler's husband while Vogler watched. But again, confusing, because it seemed like Alma also was Vogler at that point. But the point is, again, doesn't that remind you a bit of the sort of the sexual encounter on the beach between the boys and the girls in Alma's story, where someone's watching someone else have sex? Again, the extreme levels of intimacy involved there. So Alma starts to be Vogler. Okay, and then we hit sort of a crucial crux in the movie. This leads Alma to understanding what's going on with Vogler. And the big climax of the film, which is finally understanding what the fuck is going on with Vogler, the problem has to do with Vogler's motherhood. And so we get this very, very confusing thing where Alma speaks, but she's speaking the words Vogler would speak. Because again, they become the same person at this point. And so there's this lengthy speech delivered by Alma that seems to come from inside Vogler's head. But it's this idea about motherhood, that motherhood is a role, just like an actress will take on roles on the stage, motherhood is a role. But an actress can take on a role and then get what she right. An actress can pretend to be a character, and then she can stop being that character, and then she can pretend to be another character, and then she can stop being that character. But motherhood is a role, a social role, and again, we already talked about the relationship, the similarity between the roles an actress plays and the social role. But being a mother is a role that you can't just drop. And that Vogler had a baby, and it was a role she had never had before, and so society expected her to have a kid, and she took on this role, and then she was trapped in that role. And she hated it, and she wished she had an abortion. And there you get into that territory where Alma was the one that had the abortion and Vogler is the one that didn't have the abortion. But you can see that's a key link between the two women, is that Alma feels guilty because she had an abortion, and Vogler feels terrible because she had a kid and she hates the kid and she wishes she had had an abortion. Either role, either way you choose, you feel guilty and terrible. All right, I'll pick it up in the next movie. Let's feel bad together. Yeah.